Hi, everyone. It's 4 o'clock in New York, an ABC show that President Donald Trump once described as a show that was, quote, about us, his voters, the men and women he often refers to in tweets and speeches as the forgotten men and women. It was canceled today after its star, Roseanne Barr, sent a racist tweet. The show, Roseanne, was ABC's top-rated program and prompted this statement from the president just after its first episode.
Even look at Roseanne. I called her yesterday. Look at her ratings. Look at her ratings. I got a call from Mark Burnett. He did The Apprentice. He's a great guy. He said, Donald, I called just to say hello and to tell you. Did you see Roseanne's ratings? I said, Mark, how big were they? They were unbelievable. Over 18 million people. And it was about us.
How big were they? We always end up back there. ABC canceling the show after this tweet from Roseanne Barr, aimed at former senior advisor to President Obama, Valerie Jarrett. Quote, Muslim Brotherhood and Planet of the Apes had a baby, equals VJ. Barr later apologized with this tweet, quote, I apologize to Valerie Jarrett and to all Americans. I am truly sorry for making a bad joke about her politics and her looks. I should have known better. Forgive me. My joke was in bad taste. But the damage was done. ABC canceling the show just 11 hours after the initial tweet amid a firestorm of controversy. ABC releasing this statement, quote, Roseanne's Twitter statement is abhorrent, repugnant, and inconsistent with our values, and we have decided to cancel her show. Valerie Jarrett is speaking this hour to MSNBC, and as soon as she responds to this news, we will bring you her remarks. In the meantime, how did we get here? With us today, Eddie Glaude, Princeton University professor and chairman for the Center for African American Studies. Jason Johnson, politics editor for The Root. And with us at the table, Ashley Parker, White House reporter for The Washington Post. Zerlina Maxwell, a former Clinton campaign advisor, now with SiriusXM. Steve Schmidt is here, say no more. And Elise Jordan, former aide in the George W. Bush White House and State Departments, all of them, lucky for us, MSNBC analysts and contributors. Eddie Glaude, I've got to start with you because I've seen you since this news broke. How did we get here?
You know, I've been trying to answer that question, Nicolle, and it has something to do with the blurry lines of what we reward and what we punish. What Roseanne Barr tweeted today is it's easy to condemn, and it's easy for folks to reflect their own moral standing, their own anti-racism by condemning it. But it's harder to kind of ask ourselves the question, why was she rewarded in the first place? People knew Roseanne's positions. This is just the kind of the accumulation of several racist and bigoted statements, but yet she was rewarded with the show. Or you think about Donald Trump. His political career began in some ways with birtherism, and he was rewarded after talking about Mexicans as rapists and the like, rewarded with the presidency. So we have people trafficking all over the country today in very obnoxious and insidiously racist language, and people are embracing them. And yet we have this instance here with Roseanne Barr really crossing the line. In some ways, it was the last straw, the straw that broke the camel's back, and now she's being punished. So I think we need to get clearer on where the lines are, where the red line is, and what is it about our current moment that allows, in some ways, folk to traffic in all of this hate and to exploit people's fears and benefit from it. And at the same time, some of us want to condemn it. It's happening all at once. So it's a very confusing time in some ways.
Jason, let me come to you with the sound that I started the show with. You know, it was interesting to me that in Donald Trump's words, he described the fictional show that Roseanne Barr starred in as a show about us.
Yes.
So what does today's news sound like to the ears of the people about whom the show was described by the president as being about?
It means that ABC and a lot of networks have recognized what the real us is. I'll be honest with you, and just from a pure cultural standpoint, I never liked Roseanne. I didn't like it when I was a kid because I grew up next to people like the Connors in the Midwest, and they weren't that nice. And I thought that the sort of romanticization of a lot of the attitudes that she had were unpleasant. But here's the thing. You know, entertainment and Hollywood, they saw Trump get elected. They thought, OK, this could be fine. That's why we also saw Hank Williams Jr. coming back to Monday Night Football. That's why a couple years ago, you know, no one was really going to cancel Duck Dynasty, despite what some of the stars said. But there's a realization now, and this is not a hot take, but it's connected to this blue wave. It's connected to this frustration with Trump. ABC recognized, wait a minute, there isn't a market for this kind of behavior anymore. There will be consequences for us. There will be boycotts. There will be people who don't want to watch our channel. We have Chandra Rhimes who works for us. We have Yara Shahidi. We have Blackish. We can no longer economically tolerate this kind of bigotry. So when Trump says it's a show about us, that us isn't enough of the market anymore for ABC to tolerate Roseanne Barr's behavior.
Steve Schmidt, I want to show you something that our old boss said in a rare time when he sort of spoke out against this president.
Discontent deepened and sharpened partisan conflicts. Bigotry seems emboldened. Our politics seems more vulnerable to conspiracy theories and outright fabrication.
I mean, the conspiracy theories are what have been in the news. It's actually got, you know, everyone covering this White House is knee-deep in the president's conspiracy theories and lies. Right. But I remember at the time when the president gave that speech, Steve, it was this comment, it was in the aftermath of Charlottesville. And I remember when I worked for him privately in the Oval Office, the three things he feared the most were nativism, racism, and isolationism. And I think for him to see all those things realized and sanctioned and out in the light of day in the time of Trump is sufficiently alarming that that's not the only speech that sounded that note of alarm.
The nativism, the racism that you speak of, this is the original sin of the country, slavery. The idea that our country, the only one in the world ever founded on the power of an idea that all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, did not extend to everybody. It extended to white men. Over time, it has enfranchised women and gays and African Americans and Hispanic Americans. And the whole story of the country is the struggle that has existed between that perfect ideal and the forces that want to move us nearer from our flawed reality closer to it. And what we see now is a retrenchment, a pulling back from it. And we've seen this play out in our history before. We saw it with African Americans after the First World War, where they fought valorously in France and thought they would come home to a country where they defended democracy abroad, that maybe this would be their hour. And all these Confederate statues that went up in the 1920s went up not to celebrate Civil War victories, but to send a political message to African Americans. And so what we see is this vile conduct by Roseanne Barr. It's not a joke. It is a stone-cold, racist statement by one of the most prominent public supporters of a racist president who time and time again has shown us his true colors, and not for the first time at Charlottesville, when he lectures the country and he says that, well, there's good Nazis out there. And the one thing we should all be clear on, despite what our ideological differences may be, there are no good Nazis. Not there, not here, not back in those days, and certainly not in these days. And so we see the stirring of the race cauldron by this president, part of a very deliberate strategy to incite his base with conspiracy theories, with dishonesty, with lying, with race baiting. He is stirring up every worst toxin that's been buried in the ground in this country and bringing it back up to the surface, and he's doing it on purpose.
Let's watch that.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on. You know what? Look at my African American over here. Look at him. Our inner cities, African Americans, Hispanics, are living in hell because it's so dangerous. You walk down the street, you get shot. But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group, excuse me.
Wouldn't you love to see one of these NFL owners, when somebody disrespects our flag, to say, get that son of a bitch off the field right now, out, he's fired. He's fired!
You were here long before any of us were here. Although we have a representative in Congress who they say was here a long time ago. They call her Pocahontas.
It's stunning, and those are his words, Ashley Parker. So, you know, I know he likes to take your stories with 30, 40 sources and call them fake. He smeared the media this morning in a Twitter tirade. But those are his words, and we showed them just to put proof behind the point Steve's making. Is there anyone in the White House bothered by the blatant racism and the blatantly racist things that come out of the president's mouth?
So the answer to that question is yes. There are absolutely people who are privately bothered by some of the things he says, although very few have ever reached the tipping point where they will publicly come out and condemn it or resign. And so there does seem to be...
Has anyone?
I guess you could say Gary Cohen came out after the Charlottesville in that interview, I believe, with the Financial Times.
Right.
But that was not what he resigned over, right? He resigned over a trade issue a couple months later. Yeah. So people have come out here.
Close, Gare.
I'm really offended by the trade barriers. Not when he's standing there.
You can talk about good Nazis, but you screw me on trade about.
I mean, Mnuchin and Cohen are standing behind him like bobbleheads, nodding when he's talking about there being good Nazis. That doesn't precipitate the resignation. It's the trade tariffs. I can't too much.
We couldn't take it. We all jumped in.
No, so occasionally people have come out, but they haven't cited that as the cause for their resignation. I will say there are some people privately who will express discomfort, but again, not enough to actually take those affirmative steps you might expect someone to take if they were so deeply bothered.
And tonight he's on his way to a large rally in friendly territory. Any predictions about what he might say about this there?
I mean, I've learned not to predict with the president, but I think it's safe to say that this might be something he, very early on in the rally, you could see him possibly making an issue out of it. He does believe that these sort of controversial wedge issues are often, and maybe wedge issue is sort of a lighter term than I mean to use, but are good for his base. So, for instance, he thought the kneeling with the NFL and the national anthem was great for him. He thought that was win, win, win. And there was a period when we at first couldn't understand quite why he was doing this or what he was saying, but he believed, and it was borne out, that at least among his supporters, this is what they wanted to hear from him.
Well, and he won. I mean, the NFL folded like a cheap tent. Let me ask you, though, the argument that they're making today around Fox News is that Roseanne Barr had a First Amendment right to be a racist on Twitter. But NFL football players don't have that same First Amendment right to kneel in silent protest.
Yeah, it's real tricky when the same standard is applied to your folks.
Critical.
But you know, you don't have a First Amendment right to have a television show. That is not in the Constitution. And so I think that what we're seeing now is just the result of the normalization of racism, which was something that Donald Trump did during the campaign. I remember specifically meetings we had in the campaign. I met with the Latino media person. We had our own private meeting, just the two of us, at one point, because we were like, we need to be able to come up with clear messaging around the fact that he is normalizing racism and what are the consequences of that. So that means that people are feeling like they can be emboldened and racist in public without any fear of social repercussions of any kind. I think it's important that ABC decided to cancel Roseanne, but also think, you know, to piggyback off Jason's point, Marvel is a Disney property, which is tied to ABC. Marvel just made $1 billion off of Black Panther. They're preparing to make Black Panthers 2 and 3. They need black people to go to see those movies. And so our buying power is also a factor as a response to this overt racism.
But let me ask you, what was ABC doing? And I want your thoughts on this too, Steve, and then I'm going to go back out to Eddie and Jason. What was ABC doing in bed with Roseanne in the first place? I know everyone's patting him on the back today for firing her after that tweet. Let's put it up again. I mean, I don't know what you have to do if this doesn't get you fired. Calling Valerie Jarrett the product of the Muslim Brotherhood and Planet of the Apes. But what were they doing in bed with her in the first place?
Well, giving Roseanne this show, to me, is Hollywood pandering to a caricature of what they think the Trump supporter is, rather than actually trying to understand who Trump supporters are.
So here's what she tweeted. Muslim Brotherhood and Planet of the Apes had a baby. It equals Valerie Jarrett.
And by the same token, you look at when Donald Trump really started this NFL kneeling protest outrage. It was during Roy Moore's campaign, the special election, and he did it in Alabama, his harshest language in the South. That's Donald Trump pandering to Southerners because he thinks they're racist and he shares their views. So it is a horrible thing I feel that it's degrading to my fellow Southerners who look at that and look at Donald Trump as doing anything other than a con, because he is trying to exploit the dirtiest, most horrific part of America's history.
Eddie, I heard you trying to jump in. Was that you? Eddie Glaude?
Oh, I can say something.
Oh, Jason, I'm sorry. I heard one of you in my ear. Go ahead.
Yeah, I completely agree. But again, I think we can't overlook what's absolutely critical in all this, and you're making a good point, Nicolle. It's like, well, gosh, none of this is new, right? Like, she said stuff about Susan Rice, and she still ended up getting a show. And it's because, and it's partially what Zerlina has said and partially what other people have said, because, look, ABC and a lot of other networks thought, hey, we can make money off of this level of bigotry now. They thought it'd be cool. They thought it'd be fine. They thought, and again, they were rewarded. It's the #1 show on ABC. But what they've recognized is that there are more people who find this offensive. And this is not to in any way besmirch the people at ABC who made this decision. I'm sure there are lots of people there who, from a moral and ethical standpoint, were like, this is too much and I want her gone. But the fact that she got the show to begin with means that people are willing to tolerate a whole lot of terrible behavior as long as they think it's profitable. And I also have to mention this. Even before she said what she said, she was also attacking Chelsea Clinton and spreading anti-Semitic rumors about George Soros. I mean, like, you know, if the fact that you can still be rewarded for this, and she won't be the last one, it's one of the reasons I'm happy that we got Murphy Brown coming back this fall. That'll be part of the resistance. Like, there's an America out there that doesn't need this kind of television anymore.
That's a good point. All right, we're going to try to find Eddie. No one's going anywhere. And when we come back, Valerie Jarrett, the subject of those tweets from Roseanne Barr, reacts exclusively to MSNBC News this hour. We'll bring you her comments. Also ahead,